Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. The darkness in Great Ruins was silent yet bustling. The former was for people who had no abilities, hiding in the villages and ruins. If one was powerful enough, the night in Great Ruins was extraordinary bustling. Walking at that time, one could see all kinds of strange sights and encounter countless supernatural incidents. If there was fate, they could even enter marvelous worlds. Of course, it was another matter regarding if they could come back alive. The night in Great Ruins was exceptionally charming. Since a snowstorm had just ended, lumps of snow hung on the branches which shone when light landed on them. It was as though the surroundings were adorned with silver clothing. The sky suddenly became incomparably bright, and numerous life forms raised their heads in Great Ruins. The darkness was suddenly filled with numerous bright colors. But they weren't formed from natural phenomenon. Instead, they were originated from the explosions of magnificent divine arts that burst out into balls of light, lighting up the world. The darkness seemed to be a substance, however. It might get forced back by the lights, but it would flood back every time, filling up the void. The rays of light changed, growing weirder and weirder. The life forms in Great Ruins saw the stars moving quickly, tussling and battling against one another. The movement of the stars in the sky was very weird. There were 18 at the front and 2 stars behind them. The stars at the front were rushing ahead while the other 2 were chasing and harassing them. Every time the 18 stars stopped and prepared to encircle their pursuers, the 2 stars would run to the west. The 18 stars wouldn't chase, and the 2 stars would then catch up to harass them again. When the 18 stars gave chase once more, the 2 stars would escape with all they had. This happened over and over again, halting the progress of the 18 stars, making it hard for them to unleash their full speed. Beside the bonfire in a ruin, Elder of Discipline looked at that sight, and a slither of hope renewed in his heart. Heavenly Devil Patriarch and Daoist Ling Jing's motive was to delay the gods of high heavens and not clash with them head-on. If they continued with that, there might still be hope of surviving. Suddenly, the stars in the sky dimmed and disappeared. Elder of Discipline's heart sunk. The gods of high heavens had decided to hide their traces, baiting Heavenly Devil Patriarch and Daoist Ling Jing to go search for them. As long as they came forward, they would be encircled. Don't go. Elder of Discipline grew nervous, and he grabbed his collar as though he was grabbing his heart. He stared relentlessly at the 2 stars that were moving in the sky. Don't go close, don't go close. Quickly run. The 2 stars moved about in what seemed like hesitation. Suddenly, they also dimmed and could no longer be seen. The sky turned dark once again, once everyone hid their traces. The corners of Elder of Discipline's eyes twitched, and his heart pounded heavily, each beat being more violent than the last one. He was extremely nervous. Everyone had hidden their traces, and they had to fumble and seek each other in the dark. This period of time was the most dangerous. Heavenly Devil Patriarch and Daoist Ling Jing's options were much more limited than those of their opponents, who could wait or just leave. Heavenly Devil Patriarch and Daoist Ling Jing couldn't wait too long, since they had to ensure that the other party did not leave. Finally, a star lit up. One star gave off light. The next instant, the sky flared up when all kinds of strange divine arts burst forth, drowning out the star. There were dragons and phoenixes, clocks, buildings, cauldrons, and pagodas of all kinds of strange shapes, all of which were dazzling to the eyes. The power of those divine arts erupted, and the dark sky was once again lit up with different colors, driving away all the darkness at once. 18 majestic gods and devils could be faintly seen flying above, their faces either solemn or malicious. Their limbs were sturdy, and as the rays of the divine arts fell on their bodies, runes of all colors floated up. The one who was encircled by their attacks was Daoist Ling Jing. Heavenly Devil Patriarch was not with him. Daoist Ling Jing is the bait. Elder of Discipline's heart trembled violently. As the bait, Daoist Ling Jing would surely die. No one could survive after being surrounded by the attacks of 18 gods and devils. Daoist Ling Jing's aim was to use himself as a sacrifice to lure out the 18 gods of high heavens. That would give Heavenly Devil Patriarch a chance to land a sneak attack. Daoist Ling Jing's abilities were extremely powerful. He was also one of the strongest people back in the day, even daring to fight with village chief for the title of #1 in the world. However, he was defeated and lost a finger. Yet when it came to launching a sneak attack, he couldn't do much with that. Heavenly Devil Cult's teleportation clothes and teleportation flag were the best methods to go about something like that. If someone lured out the 18 gods out, Heavenly Devil Patriarch could easily launch a sneak attack, which would be their only chance to severely injure them. Ling Jing 8 methods. An inspiring shout came from the sky and shook the hearts of the people. Cease to exist from now on. Elder of Discipline raised his head to look at the final sight of Daoist Ling Jing. Even though his Ling Jing 8 methods were not inferior to Village Chief's sword picture, they were useless against the attacks of 18 gods. He was simply going to unleash his ultimate art, of which he was the proudest. He was like an artist splashing ink as much as he liked to exhibit his talent, like a scholar using all he could to write an essay. He wanted to leave his mark in the world, his shadow. At that moment, a huge flag swept open, and Heavenly Devil Patriarch appeared behind the devil gods, landing lethal attacks on them. The flag swept over him, and his figure seemed to appear beside all the gods at the same time, attacking all of them at the same time. In just an instant, he injured over 10 gods and devils. Thunder rumbled in the sky. When the sounds of the explosion from the divine arts traveled outward, many new attacks had been made. The shockwaves of the divine arts caused the air to be sometimes warm and sometimes freezing cold. Hurricanes swept down from the sky, and the snow melted before coming back just as quick. Heavenly Devil Patriarch's teleportation flag was shredded. It was destroyed in the terrifying shockwave of divine arts, but he still had his teleportation clothing. Elder of Discipline raised his head to look and saw blood raining down from above. It started with a drizzle before becoming heavier and heavier. One of the 20 stars moving in the sky dimmed and wavered. Suddenly, it went out in a fierce collision, falling from the sky. Daoist Ling Jing was dead. Elder of Discipline's face dimmed. Only Heavenly Devil Patriarch was left. And he was still battling. Even if he was skilled in the 7 writings of creations in great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures, it would be hard for him to change the outcome of the battle. In the ruin, Elder of Discipline didn't raise his head to look at the battle in the sky anymore. Instead, he stared at the flames of the bonfire, subconsciously adding more firewood to it. The flames grew taller and taller, and the intensity of the heat also grew, yet he couldn't feel anything at all. Why is this winter so cold? He shivered from the cold and added more firewood. What's wrong with this fire? No matter how fierce it is, it's still so cold. How is it still so cold when I added so much firewood? Another star dimmed in the sky, before bursting forth with light again. It was exceptionally gorgeous, lighting up the sky. A marvel of creation, the light and shade it dominates. A shout tore through the darkness, inspiring and shocking. Dong! The melodious sound of a bell came from the sky, rushing in all directions. It faded away soon after, and the marvel of creation ceased to exist. The lights in the sky gradually dispersed, and the darkness slowly came back after the explosion. A star had fallen. Elder of Discipline buried his head in his hands and didn't say anything. He was waiting for daybreak, to retrieve the corpses of the 2 old men. In the sky, the 18 stars paused for a moment before continuing to head east. Great ruins God-broken mountains were sharp as a blade, their peaks were covered in snow. In the sky, flood dragons were rushing toward them. The wind was strong and blew their whiskers and manner backward. Beside Qin Mu, Sai Yunxiang was trying to use heart inspection mirror to contact the young patriarch. Moments after, she fell into a daze. Patriarch said that he won't be coming back. He said that you guys don't need to miss him. Qin Mu was stunned, and Granny Sai turned her face around to secretly wipe away her tears. That old guy actually left earlier than us. Village chief was stumped for words and could only sigh. He's as impatient as ever. They came closer and closer to God-broken mountain range, and their eyes went past, looking into great ruins that were shrouded in darkness. Over there, they could see stars moving in the sky, rushing in their direction. Mua, stop on the mountain. Village chief suddenly ordered. Qin Mu gave a command, and the flood dragons lowered their speed. They stretched their bodies while their blade-like claws clasped onto the mountain peaks to stop themselves. With their fluttering whiskers and strong bodies, they crushed numerous mysterious pearl crossbows. The snow was white while the mountains were black. The flood dragons, however, were of all colors, like white, black, red, and even sapphire blue. Their bodies shone with light which came from the natural rune markings of their race. They shone upon the snow, giving it a colorful hue. Let's have the battle here. Village chief looked around and asked, "What do you guys think about this place?" King Kuan examined his surroundings and said, "Very good, it's just a little cold." Tuxing Feng jumped down from a dragon's back and pulled his clothes tighter around himself. He muttered, "This damn place is still so cold, being warm underground is still the best." Human Emperor Qin, if you go to the underground world of our Earth travelers, your horizons will definitely expand. The whole underground world is covered in jade glass and thick crystals hanging from the ceiling. There are those with 6 and 8 edges, all clustered together like brightly colored decorations. With the light from the magma reflecting off them, they are so pretty. There are also numerous plants that grow in the magma and taste amazing. They burn your throat like fine wine, but the taste lingers on. Stop speaking. The serpent on Shu Shengwu's shoulder gulped down its saliva. I'm getting hungry just from your descriptions. Tuxing Feng raised his head to look at the stars that were closing in, and he grabbed his sharp horn-shaped hammer while muttering, "I wonder if I'll have the chance to return underground for another bite." Our underground world still has flaming fruit, which is born from the magnetic element force. That taste. Village chief looked at Qin Mu and said, "Mua, bring the dragons and your little wives down the mountain. You are not needed here anymore, just remember to collect the corpses tomorrow." Qin Mu nodded and called the dragons over. He then brought Cai Yunxiang, Hu Linga, and Yang Jingjing down the mountain. In the sky, the stars were getting closer and closer. Are we just going to look at them fighting for eternal peace? Cai Yunxiang was not willing to just leave like that. What can we do? Can we really not do anything? We can go to great ruins. Qin Mu's gaze flickered. We can find sunship and moonship. But this darkness is blocking our path. However, we have a powerful bodyguard. Where's Surging River Dragon King? Dragon King is here. Under God-broken mountain range, river water churned as a huge dragon rose from the darkness. Coiling himself, he lowered his huge head. What's your majesty's command? Dragon rearing sovereign carried them through Surging River and leaped past Secret Waters Pass, swimming into great ruins. He swam close to Border Dragon City and behind them, the water churned as a flood dragon broke out through its surface. Your Majesty, I'm binded by the oath so I can't leave Surging River. The Pact of Earth Count ties me down, so I would die if I leave. You guys want to go to Star Sea, but I can't go there. Dragon rearing sovereign fell back into Surging River. However, I can have Divine Flood Dragon King bring you guys there. That flood dragon who had showed up was almost the same color as the river water, and it was none other than Divine Flood Dragon King. Its abilities were extremely powerful, and no inferior to those of Dragon rearing sovereign. With him carrying Qin Mu and the rest into great ruins, the darkness would be repelled. Qin Mu brought Cai Yunxiang and Yang Jingjing onto the back of the Divine Flood Dragon King. Meanwhile, Hu Linga came to his shoulders. The flood dragons called out Maha Maha and climbed onto the Divine Flood Dragon King's body, acting very intimate. The dragon Chileen also jumped over, acting very respectful. The Divine Flood Dragon King soared into the sky and went straight for Star Sea. Qin Mu turned back to look, but could no longer see everyone on God-broken mountain range. Meanwhile in the sky, the stars were closing in rapidly. Suddenly, it looked like someone had lit fire beacons on the mountains of God-broken mountain range, and they were extremely gorgeous. They linked up into a line, creating a very beautiful sight, decorating the monotonous night of great ruins with picturesque charm. Divine Flood Dragon King carried the group into the abyss of Star Sea, where God-broken mountain range could no longer be seen. Why hasn't Patriarch arrived yet? The dragon Qin asked in bewilderment. He should be arriving soon, right? Cai Yunxiang opened her mouth, but couldn't say anything. Qin Mu said, the Night of Great Ruins is very dangerous, so he might be a little late. Let's go to Sunwell first. The dragon Qin nodded, then asked, why did Saintus say he wouldn't be coming? The sky is dark, so he naturally can't come. Fatty dragon, stop asking. On the peaks of God-broken mountain range, the furnace behind Mute was blazing furiously. Blind's eyes were like two stars while Butcher's clothes flapped in the wind as he held his knives in his hands. Village Chief floated in the air, his vital chi giving him a visible form, as if he'd grown back his hands and legs. All of them stood upright on mountain peaks. Cripple and Old Ma stood together. Granny Sai, deaf, and Apothecary shared one peak as well. Old Dao Master, Old Rulai, Hermit Qing Yu, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, and Yu Jiaoqing who each took a mountain peak. Tuxing Feng, Xian Shengwu, King Yi, King Kuan. And the 5 immortals of the demon race had extraordinary abilities, so they stood by themselves as well. Everyone's primordial spirit took shape, almost materializing into a physical form. They were like gods and devils, standing behind them and waiting quietly for the battle to arrive. The sky was shrouded by the darkness, yet 18 stars were growing larger and larger as they closed in at a quick speed. Village Chief's aura burst forth, and a trail of sword chi burst into the sky from the peak like a precipice that stretched from the heaven to earth, blocking the path of those stars. Sun on east sea 1,000 layers wave. Butcher shook his knives, and knife lights rose like a huge sun. At that moment, sound waves went out, and their momentum was like the sea. The waves reflected the knife lights shot out from the sun and shone in the dark sky. Truly the #1 knife skills. Heaven Knife lives up to his name. Old Ma's body grew larger while a vertical eye grew out at the heart of his brows. He was like a giant with a green dragon coiling around his body. Behind his head, a huge sun formed up, accompanied by the rumbling of the wind and thunder. Kwa Fu chasing the sun. Abba! Mute placed his wooden chest down and raised his thumb at Old Ma. The chest opened, and silver pellets flowed and changed repeatedly. Venomous substances flowed out from Apothecary's herb basket and spread out in all directions around him like a flood. Suddenly, spiders jumped out and began to weave a web between the mountains. They moved in the air, working tirelessly. The star image of great overarching heavenly stars suddenly appeared behind Granny Sai, before growing smaller and smaller. It rapidly shrunk and landed into her palm. Cripple, on the other hand, was nervous and looked around as though he was going to run away at any moment. Burn, underground fire. Tuxing Foam laughed loudly, and the god-broken mountain range below his feet suddenly erupted like a volcano. When he hit it with his hammer, the volcano became taller, growing spontaneously. King Kuan laughed and said, 3-inch nail is still full of heroic spirit. Look at my water breaking the starry sky. Behind him, a giant wave rose into the sky and erected itself between heaven and earth like a sea. King Kuan, lend me your strength. Xian Shengwu laughed loudly and revealed his true form. He leaped into the sea and became a tortoiseshell ship sailing on the surface that was perpendicular to the land. King Yi stretched out an arm and suddenly trembled. Feathers grew out of her arm and formed a wing. It clanked as the feathers rubbed against one another to make the shape of a goose-wing knife. The 5 immortals of the demon race brought out their weapons as well. Willow Immortal wielded a whip, White Immortal carried a ball of thread, Fox Immortal hugged her peeper, while Rat Immortal and Yellow Immortal carried a grey and yellow sack respectively. They are here! Butcher shouted loudly. They plan to barge through by force. Be decisive, we have to stop them at any cost, preventing them from crossing God-broken mountain range. The trails of Starling came closer and closer until they formed a straight line. They were like 18 comets which aimed for the sea erected by King Kuan, expecting to pierce it in one go. Butcher's knife lights shifted and shone on the sea surface. In an instant, they reflected back to slash toward the stars. Clank, clank, clank. There was a loud clang when Butcher blocked the first star. The second star came straight after and destroyed Sun on East Sea Thousand Layers Wave, and Butcher couldn't help but grunt at it. He was blown into the deep sea, where he borrowed King Kuan's power to disperse the attack. Just as the second star crashed into the sea, it was tangled up by the webs shooting out from the butts of the spider sprinting over. The star crashed into the sea surface with the spider webs and got dragged back by them, unable to continue forward. The third and fourth stars rushed over and smashed into the sea. Yet its surface suddenly split apart and revealed a sea of blood behind. Sword of Founding Emperor, Sea of Blood. It was too late for the two stars to stop their momentum, so they could only brace themselves for the incoming attack and try to break the move. Boom, boom. Two violent collisions rang out, and a blooded god and devil brought their broken bodies out of the sea of blood, shrieking miserably. However, they were incomparably powerful. Even though they had lost their momentum, they were still a god and a devil. They thus worked together to break Village Chief's move. However, what welcomed them right after was still a sea of blood. Sword of Founding Emperor, Sea of Blood. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor trembled his sword, and what he executed was also Sword of Founding Emperor, Sea of Blood. It was the same move as what Village Chief had used. Yet the moves were slightly different and their concept was worlds apart. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had comprehended the move from Def's painting of the sword god's back. It could be said that it was the inspiration for his sword skills. The god and devil were terrified, but they had no way to retreat. They could only rush into the sword lights that were like the sea of blood. Kai, 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 Kai. There was a screeching noise, and divine blood poured out along with a few divine bones rolling out. Other star rushed over and collided with sword picture. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor coughed out blood as it was destroyed. Seeing that the other stars were about to cross God-broken mountain range, Rat Immortal opened up his sack and shook it in the wind. The sack expanded and turned into something like a huge cave, absorbing the stars inside it. Rat Immortal hurriedly tightened the sack, about to land lethal blows on the gods and devils inside when the sack exploded, blowing Rat Immortal back. Willow Immortal hurriedly shook her arm, which seemed to be boneless as it swept Rat Immortal back. Just as she caught him, she felt the terrifying power of the gods and devils coming from Rat Immortal's body. Her face twisted, and her arm distorted like twisted dough. Willow Immortal flipped and tumbled, rolling frantically to shake off the terrifying energy. White Immortal saw the bad situation and immediately flew forward. The needles in his plate stabbed into Willow Immortal and Rat Immortal one after another, directing the terrifying energy out from their bodies. Only then were their lives preserved. Pack, pack, pack. Huge waves rose on the sea's surface, and majestic figures stood on them, pouring seawater in all directions. Star Sovereign Xiao, Flower Sovereign, and Star Sovereign Yang were in the lead, forming a triangular formation. The other 13 gods and devils, in the meantime, were moving by themselves. The 16 gods and devils pressed down on King Kuan until his arms were trembling, unable to hold the sea. He grunted repeatedly, then his arms suddenly cracked and broke. The 16 gods and devils were still pressing downwards, and King Kuan couldn't help vomiting out blood. He immediately lowered the sea flat. Mountain peaks broke through the sea surface, revealing everyone who stood on them while the sea churned around them. The sea wasn't deep, only 300 yards or so. The tortoise-shell ship which was Qin Mu sailed upside beneath the surface. The eyes of the flying serpent and black tortoise flashed as they looked at the inverted image of the gods and devils, waiting for the chance to strike. Village Chief looked at Star Sovereign Xiao, Flower Sovereign, and Star Sovereign Yang. Star Sovereign, everyone, you should know the consequences of opening those treasures. Must you wipe out all the people in Eternal Peace Empire? Star Sovereign Xiao was expressionless when he said, if you want to blame someone, blame yourself for not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Since you angered high heavens and those above, you can't blame us. Old Human Emperor, we are simply acting on orders. No room for discussion. Star Sovereign Xiao shook his head. Even though I hate everyone here to the core, I don't hate the commoners of this world. I also don't want to do this, but when Emperor Yangfeng blew Jade Sovereign up with a cannon, the time for discussion was lost. There was even a change in the law and the path, which Qin Mu used that time to come beneath Star Sovereign Qiao. With swiftness, the flying serpent pierced through the sea to bind its target. The black tortoise's attack then followed right after, attempting to kill him in one strike. Broke off all hopes of discussion. Star Sovereign Qiao allowed the flying serpent to coil around his body, so the black tortoise attack. When he came out, he was suddenly faced with Flower Sovereign and Star Sovereign Yang stabbing a flower and a flute into his temples, crushing the brain. The flying serpent hissed and wanted to save him, but Star Sovereign Qiao's divine sword slashed at him, slicing him into chunks. Only after wiping out all the commoners of this generation will the higher-ups be at ease. Xian Wu. King Kuan shouted out, and the golden horned lance in his hand shone with brilliant rays as he stabbed toward Star Sovereign Qiao. Tuxing Feng gritted his teeth and swung his sharp horn-shaped hammer to attack while the gods behind Star Sovereign Qiao moved to welcome them. With their movement, blind, mute, the five immortals, and King Yi had no choice but to move as well. God-broken mountain range suddenly trembled and became a lot shorter when it got pressed down by everyone's divine arts. In the meantime, Star Sea became brighter and brighter as chains rattled within it. A sun slowly rose from the abyss of Star Sea, repelling the surrounding darkness. The sun rose in the west. Sunlight and fire spread at a great speed from the long chains to the whole of sunship, which repelled the darkness of great ruins, lighting up the surroundings. Numerous monsters in the darkness sizzled when they got hit by the sunlight, resulting in trails of black smoke. In a village nearby, the abandoned people of great ruins were rudely awakened. They stared in a daze at the mountain-like sunship which was striding with its 12 pillar-like legs. Sunship passed by the village, but there was no discomfort when the radiant sunlight shone on the villagers' bodies. Instead, they felt really warm, yet the monsters in the darkness were all fleeing for their lives. Ever since founding Emperor era had ended, it was extremely rare to see this kind of sight. At its end, the darkness had descended, and there were dozens of sunships walking towards the west in great ruins, repelling the darkness and bringing light to people. Yet after founding Emperor era, the last sunship grew tattered and the sun was extinguished. Only Sun Guardian and the Sun Herders were left dragging a black sun, continuously protecting great ruins in secret. The former glory of the ship could no longer be seen. Yet Sunship had revived and brought an intense blazing sun to pierce through the darkness. Wherever it passed, there was light. On Sunship, there were giants bathed in the golden light. With the constant trembling of the huge ship, they were moving closer to God-broken mountain range. Sun Guardian, something seems to be moving ahead. On Sunship, Sun Herd Chief was extremely nervous when he sensed something humongous coming in their direction. He immediately reported it to Yang Jingjing, who was controlling Sunship. Yang Jingjing was majestic like a heavenly god at that point, and she looked into the darkness when she heard his words. She could sense a terrifying creature getting close. The newcomer was coming from behind Sunship and its speed was much faster. The girl's gaze was like two incomparably thick light pillars which tore the darkness apart, showing her the truth hidden by it. The fog parted, and towering mountains and precipitous ridges showed up. Yang Jingjing was slightly stunned. The incomparably tall mountains were formed by countless white bones, and when they were shined on by the divine light from her eyes, they squirmed and shrieked, trying to hide as though they were afraid of her gaze. In the meantime, the fog behind the white bone mountain became even thicker. There was a sea of it with a continuous chain of mountains, two of which were like gates leading to a hidden world. They were gates of hell, leading to Fengdu. The speed of Fengdu sweeping over was extremely fast, and it soon caught up to Sunship. The fog swept past the surroundings of Sunship, and everyone on the ship realized that the law of heaven and earth had changed. The blood and flesh on their bodies disappeared, turning them into skeletons. The white bones mountains in the fog passed through the people along with the ground and rivers. Even the sun of Sunship that was in the sky had also become dim, turning green and hazy. Yang Jingjing stretched out her hand, and the law of Fengdu did not change her body. She was too powerful and no longer under the control of Fengdu. She saw that Fengdu world didn't seem to have substance. It was in a different plane from theirs, and she couldn't touch anything from there. Then, she saw Fengdu, the majestic ghost city. The indomitable hell gods were standing on the city walls and towers as though they were going to face a strong enemy. Meanwhile, in the center of Fengju, the cape of a devil god formed by darkness hung down and spread out in all directions. Its owner was even taller and more imposing than sunship. It passed through their bodies, but Ling Jing didn't manage to see the person's face. She only saw two fire-red eyes in the darkness of the cape. Swoosh! Fengju world flashed past, the fog continuing to surge forward, vanishing into the darkness. The sun gradually regained its brightness, and the people on the ship looked down at their bodies to see that their flesh and blood had returned. They didn't know what had happened. The fog of Fengju world is heading towards God-Broken Mountain Range. Ling Jing raised her head to look at God-Broken Mountain Range. It was where village chief and the rest had stayed to intercept the gods of high heavens, and their battle was quite intense now. The mountains of God-Broken Mountain Range sometimes grew high and sometimes sank down into the ground. Sword lights and knife lights would slice the sky from time to time, shocking people. All kinds of voices rang out like the bellows of devils and the whispers of gods. Brother who herds cows rode Divine Flood Dragon King to borrow Moon ship, but he said that it is very far away from here and he needs to bring the ship from Moon Well to Star Sea, so he wants me to defend his elders for a moment for him. I wonder if he can come back in time. What's that? Ling Jing hurried with all her might, stunned. From God-Broken Mountain Range to Great Ruins, balls of will-o'-the-wisp surged forth. She had no idea from where they had come. Pleiades sun-star hoops. Layers of fire changed into star hoops, and she looked toward the will-o'-the-wisps. Paper boats were actually floating within them from the endless darkness. On the bows of the ghostly boats hung lanterns which shone in the darkness. There were also numerous paper men riding paper horses and sprinting frantically into the fog. This video will end here.